The High Court will hear a challenge by Cardinal George Pell over his conviction for child sex abuse. Reporter Elizabeth Byrne joins us now from the High Court in Canberra. Elizabeth, first off, just take us through what happened there in the court this morning.
Well, it was very brief. We had to wait till the end of the list, but the High Court, two judges of the High Court have decided that the full bench should consider George Pell's case, where he is seeking to challenge the Victorian Court of Appeal ruling that had upheld his conviction by a jury in February this year.
Now, there's no explanation by the High Court judges today, but take us through what is known about that application by George Pell's legal team for a hearing.
Well, we know about the arguments because both legal teams filed extensive paper documents ahead of this application this morning, and they basically outlined the battleground as being George Pell's lawyers want to support Justice Mark Weinberg's dissenting view in the Court of Appeal, where he found that the jury result was unreasonable and that there was a prospect of, well, he questioned the evidence given by the complainant. The other two judges threw all of that out and upheld the jury findings. So the prosecutors are saying that there's no foundation for a High Court appeal, but now they're going to have to go and develop those arguments to fight it out in the court probably next year.
Yeah, and so in previous coverage of the defence's case, it said that it was going to be relying on two proposed grounds for appeal that focus on the majority decision to dismiss Pell's case, as you just mentioned, but I'd like to go into those in a bit more detail with you. So it quoted the defence in these papers as saying the majority erred by finding that their belief in the complainant required the applicant to establish that the offending was impossible. So can you just talk us through what that means in layman's terms?
Well, what that was about was this question about whether George Pell's robes were too heavy to have allowed this offending to have occurred. That was sort of at the core of it. So there will be no doubt some more discussion about that in the High Court, because both sides will be wanting to push their arguments that on the one hand that wasn't an issue, that he could still have committed the offences wearing those robes, and of course the other side that, well, it was impossible for him to have done that. It's interesting the question about where they raised the question about George Pell having to prove that it was impossible.
Yeah.
That's a sort of a little bit of a legal somersault, really. Whether that will be an issue in the High Court, I'm not sure. I think people will have to go back and think very hard about how they present that when the court comes to consider it.
And so the second proposed ground was that the majority erred in their conclusion that the verdicts were not unreasonable.
Yes, that's right. Well, one side said they weren't unreasonable, and the other side, well, the single judge, Mark Weinberg, said that it was unreasonable, and that was because he'd questioned the evidence given by the complainant who gave evidence to the jury in secret. So we can never know what some of that material was, because that was all held in camera and only the judges and the jury know about it. But these things will have to be developed and worked out as the case goes forward, and no doubt we'll find out more, because both sides will be filing their arguments to the High Court, and that will be published on the internet on the High Court site before any hearing happens.
Right. And when is it? Well, first of all, you've been covering the High Court for quite some time. What percentage of cases that apply for an appeal to be heard actually get heard?
Well, I don't know what, I haven't got a figure on
No.
that, but it is quite low. There are the ones that apply and never even make it to first base. There are the ones that end up in this list which are mostly dismissed. It's very unusual for the High Court to say yes to a case on the papers, although occasionally it does, like it did today. But you find many more cases that go to a special leave application hearing. Many more of those do get through, although quite a few of them are rejected as well. But if the High Court's willing to hear someone argue out why they should have a hearing, they're much more inclined to say, we think there's a prospect of a good case here.
Yeah. And so do you have any idea about those percentages or the number of cases, or can you point to a case previously where there has been an appeal to the High Court? The High Court has decided to hear that appeal and it's been successful?
Oh, quite. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the percentage of successful appeals to the court are, but that's, quite often cases do succeed. I think the ones that I enjoy the most, there's only been one or two since I've been here, are the ones where someone has represented themselves. But, there's sometimes the High Court, one thing I will say about the High Court though is when it does rule, it gives a decisive and clear ruling because it wants to clarify the law in most cases. So often I'll be prepared for some complicated response or some complicated judgment, and I'll find they'll have just laid something out very simply so that everyone can understand it. So whatever they do with this case, I think that's probably what we're heading for either way.
And so where to from here now? You mentioned that the legal teams representing different factors in this case will file documents ahead of the hearing. When is that likely to happen? And when would the hearing be likely to be? Before the end of this year or not?
No, it won't be before the end of this year, I don't think. There's only a few weeks of sitting left and they're all taken up. It's likely to be sometime next year, though. How soon it would be brought on, I don't know. It could be even late next year. But I would imagine that the legal teams in this will be doing a bit of work over Christmas.
OK, we'll leave there. Elizabeth Byrne reporting from the High Court in Canberra.